Tonight we're going to take a look at Roger Zelazny's This Immortal. When this novel came out, it won the Hugo in 1966, a prize that is shared with none other than Frank Herbert's Dune. So for a very long time I think this novel has been living under that shadow, but it's not warranted. It's a very good novel in its own right, and it shouldn't be compared. They're two very different novels. What we learned through the book, which is written in a first-person narrative, is that there's this guy called Conrad Nomikos, who appears to be as old as time itself. In Conrad's account, he talks about his past and some of his memories, and it's really difficult to tell when myth ends and the man begins. Which is straight into Roger Zelazny's key strengths. He's written many novels where he takes these omnigod sort of creatures from mythology or religion and puts them into a sci-fi setting. He's done that in this book, in this Immortal, and also one that comes to mind is Lord of Light, which I've got just here behind me, which was another highly acclaimed novel, which takes themes from Hinduism actually. So the story unfolds with Conrad, who's this guy who seems to be as ageless as time itself, but he was also a leader of a rebel force that was aimed to keep some extraterrestrials off the planet and having Earthlings manage and control their own destiny. And these aliens are vegans. And it's not the kind of vegan you may be thinking. These are aliens from the planet Vega, but they're referred to as vegans in the book, which I thought was interesting in this day and age where people's health choices take them down that path. So what we learn is that Conrad was the leader of this rebel group, but he's also head of this government department set up to protect and maintain and secure Earth's remaining treasures like the pyramids and other ancient artifacts. And what we learn is that there's one particular vegan in a guy called Court Mystigo who wants to go for a tour of Earth, and we're not quite sure what the motive is behind his tour. So he reaches out to Conrad to give him a guided tour. What we also learn is that party that makes up the tour has one of Conrad's former lovers in this rebel alliance person, who wants to assassinate Court Vegan because they're sure in themselves that the vegan is there, and whatever outcome of his survey is, they're not quite sure what the survey and what he's actually doing on Earth, but they're assured, they're convinced that the outcome, whatever happens with that vegan report, is going to be to the detriment of Earth. And they've set out to hire a hired assassin in a guy called Hassan, who's this very skillful assassin. Now, what is not known to the party is that Hassan and Conrad know each other from previous existences or previous lives, if you like. Not that they're previous lives, but in a previous life, right? And Conrad and Hassan share this very interesting ethical bond where, Hassan wants to cure this. He's been hired to assassinate this vegan. But Conrad has sworn to protect the vegan because he's not as convinced as his counterpart is on the true nature of the report that the vegan is preparing, or what the true nature of the tour is. So he's given the vegan the benefit of the doubt, and he's vowed to protect Court Mystigo from any attempt of assassination by Hassan. And I thought it was rather interesting because there's this really interesting bond between Hassan and Conrad. It's a very strong mutual respect, and they both abide by this very strong code of ethics and code of conduct, which I thought was rather interesting in a novel. So then the book goes on where Conrad and his party are captured by this mutant bunch of people, and it's rather interesting there because Conrad and Hassan need to work together to overcome and free themselves, and to ultimately them finding out what the actual purpose of the vegan Court Mystigo's purpose was on the planet, and it all comes to a head in the final chapters of the novel. So look, very interesting novel. I love Roger Zelazny's world that he builds. it's just, he's got a beautiful, poetic and charming way, very lyrical way of writing that I really thoroughly enjoyed. I also absolutely adore his character descriptions, and we're just blessed in this book that he meets multiple people in his travels, and every single time he meets a new party, he goes through this description of the people involved, and it's truly just wonderful to see how Zelazny's craft at the character description comes about. He has a wonderful gift that I really thoroughly enjoyed in this novel. But it's also got some interesting and challenging parts to it as well. Now, what I would say is, don't read this book as you're falling asleep at night, because there are it's a book that I think if you invest the time to concentrate and read through it, you're going to be greatly rewarded, because there are sections in this novel that that Conrad talks to Greek mythology, and unless you have a strong Greek mythology, or not even strong, but a pretty good understanding of Greek mythology, you will get lost in some of that dialogue or some of his account when he's talking to the Greek mythology and some of his past. I know I had to sort of perk myself out of bed. I've got that terrible habit, I read before bed, and I sort of had to shake myself and wake myself up to make sure I was fully understanding what was going on here. So I don't recommend you read it just before you go to bed, but if you do and you concentrate and you keep yourself awake, you will be rewarded, because this novel is just wonderful. And having said that, though, I did find myself sometimes reading this book well past what I thought would be my bedtime, because when the dialogue does get going and the story starts to flow, you're truly captivated. Otherwise, I was just thinking, okay, what happens next? What happens next? And I stayed on to want to read more, right? So it's got that very interesting blend where some areas I thought for me needed to be slowed down. You needed to pay attention to get the full experience of the novel and the wonderful writing that Zelazny had. And then there were other areas that went really fast, and I just found myself really engaged and just flowing through the book. So I've talked to the prose. Wonderful prose, wonderful lyrical, charming way of writing. Great character development. I love his character description. So there is a section in the novel that I sort of liked and also found challenging, because I had to keep a mental register as to who's saying what. In the sense that there's a particular, and it happened a few times in the book, where there's a passage where, someone walks into a room and you're not quite sure who's in the room because you're not informed as a reader. And it goes into a page or a page and a half of dialogue. And you really need to sort of pay attention as to, well, who's saying what, because it doesn't say who's speaking. And you sort of have to keep this mental register as to who's saying what, just so you can follow the dialogue. Because if you don't, it starts not to make so much sense, and you're sort of finding yourself having to reread that dialogue. But look, the dialogue is well done, and that's the strange thing, because I did enjoy those dialogue passages, because the narrative just flows really well, and there's a lot that gets conveyed during that dialogue. But you do need to keep that mental register in your brain as to who is saying what, because it can be rather lengthy dialogue at times. And like I said, and sometimes the second speaker is not introduced and you're not even quite sure who it is, which makes it just a little bit more difficult to follow. But having said that, like I said, I think I enjoyed it. I'm not quite sure why, but I did find myself, like I said, having to sort of perk myself up and say, hey, pay attention here, because you're going to miss something. So look, very interesting. I really did enjoy it. I would, rank it as one of Roger Zelazny's better works. I really did enjoy Lord of Light as well. So I'll be really keen to review that in the future and see where it ranks. Now, this novel does get, compared to June a fair bit. And I said in the introduction that I don't necessarily think that's fair or justified. But it's difficult not to compare the two, right? Because I'm actually reading June at the moment as well. And when it comes to our Sci-Fi Shed later here, and when we go to rank these great books, we're going to have to make that decision as well. So don't compare this book to June, and you will be rewarded with a very good reading experience. Invest the time to stay awake, and you will be rewarded with a great reading experience. It's one of those novels that I don't know. It's a great novel, but you do need to pay attention, especially during those Greek mythology sort of sections, if you're not well versed with mythology. But there's not a whole lot of it, right? So I don't want to sort of make you feel like there's 50% of this book's about Greek mythology and you better pay close attention. Because I'd say that 70 to 80% of this novel just flows, and it flows wonderfully. And like I said, it's very lyrical, very charming way of writing. His character description is wonderful. And overall, it's a very, very enjoyable read. Yeah, I really did enjoy Roger Zelazny's This Immortal. I first read this book, it would have been 20 years ago again as well. And admittedly, you know, I don't remember much of the plot. And the plot is probably something that could have been a bit better. But I did remember the Greek mythology aspects of the book. I did remember And Call Me Conrad, which is the other name of this novel, actually. And a couple of times during the recount of his last couple of months, he sort of says, hey, and call me Conrad, right? And that always stuck with me. I think the initial... And I think it was also Roger Zelazny's preferred title for the book, was a better fitting title to This Immortal. I guess I understand the reason for the name change, but I think I also preferred And Call Me Conrad. I just felt it sort of flowed better with the narrative of the book. So yeah, look, a very interesting book. I highly enjoyed it. I think it'd do quite well on the Shed and the ladder here. So let's take a look and see where we rank this one tonight. So back to the Sci-Fi Shed ladder and ranking this book. And I actually forgot to say, I normally finish off my reviews with talking about who would I recommend this novel to. And look, Roger Zelazny's This Immortal, I would recommend to anyone who's into mythology, like specifically Greek mythology. I think there's certain elements in the novel that I think you would relate and enjoy considerably, actually. I think also if you want to see someone who writes a really good character description and you want to inform yourself, maybe you're an aspiring writer and you want to learn how to write really good character descriptions, I highly recommend Roger Zelazny This Immortal. He's one of my favorite authors when it comes to character descriptions. I always just love the way he describes people. It's just fascinating to me. So I think I would recommend it to any aspiring writer who's struggling with writing character descriptions. I think that you'll find some really interesting concepts that he uses and you might enjoy. And obviously anyone who likes sort of vintage style science fiction novels, I think you'd really enjoy it as well. So now I'm back to the Hugo Shed winning ladder here and ranking this novel. And where would I place it? So maybe we'll start from the bottom today. Is This Immortal by Roger Zelazny better than Babel 17? I think it is. And I've just talked as to some of the reasons why I think I enjoyed it a lot more. I think Zelazny's writing style, I enjoy a lot more than Samuel Delaney's. So I think that alone for me was a much more enjoyable experience, and I loved Roger Zelazny's character descriptions and the characters themselves. So Conrad, I thought, was a very interesting and complex character, and in both appearance and personality, and I think his appearance and his personality really sort of talk to the multi-duplicity of the character, which I thought was very interesting. So yeah, better characters, better character definitions. I enjoy the writing style a lot more. So definitely better than Babel 17. Is it better than Flowers for Algernon? Again, I would say yes. I think the science fiction themes in This Immortal, I think are better than Flowers for Algernon. I would consider this more a fantastic work of fiction than I do science fiction. So I think for that reason alone, I think it's going to be hard for me to rank This Immortal below Flowers for Algernon. Is it better than The Demolished Man? In some ways, the two books are very similar to each other, and which really talks to just how good The Demolished Man was from Alfred Bester, because it was written almost, 12 years later, and I still think that the writing almost sort of matches what you get in Alfred Bester. I think it's a very underrated book, that one, actually. But I think I enjoyed This Immortal more than I did The Demolished Man. I think the writing, the characters, the themes in the book, and the pace of the book. Like I said, the pace in some areas were just wonderfully flowing, and they had, I think, that nice balance of some deep mythology that you sort of needed to hold the horses a bit, slow down and just read and appreciate it, to some very fast flowing, narrative, as well as dialogue. So yeah, interesting mix, which I think I enjoyed it more than The Demolished Man. Was it better than The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin? Man, this is a really hard one, because in some ways I did enjoy reading this Immortal more than I did reading The Left Hand of Darkness. Oh, why do these things have to be so difficult? Do we have to skip The Left Hand of Darkness again and go to The Forever War? Was it better than The Forever War? I don't think it's as complex as The Forever War. I think The Forever War is one of those books that it seems simple on the surface, but I think it says a lot more than what is written on the page. And I think for that reason, I wouldn't rank it higher than The Forever War. So is it going to be between The Left Hand of Darkness and The Forever War, or The Demolished Man? I think I've just made up my mind. It's going to be right there. I don't think it is better than The Left Hand of Darkness. I think Ursula's writing is, at least in The Left Hand of Darkness, is better than Zelazny's. So like I said, that dialogue, some of that dialogue section where you have to keep this mental register, I'm not sure if I loved it or hated it, to be honest. And I suspect that some people wouldn't like that. I was sort of sitting on the fence. I wasn't quite sure. But yeah, look, that's where I think we're going to whack it. But look at 1966. What a great year 1966 was. We had Babel 17 with Samuel R. Delaney's, co-winning the Nebula with Flowers for Algernon. And on the other hand, we had This Immortal by Roger Zelazny and June co-winning the Hugo. Very good year for science fiction, 1966. We may need to talk about that a little bit more down the track. But yeah, 1966, what a great year for science fiction. Hey, this has been the Sci-Fi Shed. It's definitely not getting any easier. I hope you enjoyed this review, and thanks for everything, and I'll see you next time in the shed.